Welcome back, everybody. We are diving deep today into some really powerful chapters from the book of Isaiah,
hmm
chapters 43 through 45. Um, and I gotta say, these chapters are just brimming with powerful imagery, big questions, really big themes: redemption, creation, the whole concept of a chosen people, even this super fascinating character, Cyrus, a non-Israelite king who was actually chosen by God.
Yeah, it's really one of the most interesting sections, I think, of Isaiah.
So let's jump right into it. Isaiah 43. We're immediately hit with this incredibly vivid scene of God's protection. And it's not just about being safe, it's about being totally unharmed even when surrounded by chaos. Think like walking through fire, no burns, wading through deep waters, you don't drown.
Yeah.
What kind of emotions does that evoke for you?
Well, I think, the writer's definitely trying to give you this sense of security in God's power.
What?
Imagine yourself as an Israelite living in exile, longing for home. This imagery is going to be powerful, right? It's offering hope. It's offering reassurance that no matter how bad things get, God is with you.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like this unshakable faith that you'll come out the other side no matter what. Then it gets even more intense. It's not just about protection. It's about God redeeming Israel, even offering up other people and nations in exchange for their lives. I mean, doesn't that seem a little extreme?
Yeah. It's definitely one of those verses that, raises some eyebrows when you first read it.
Okay.
But, I think if you put yourself in the mindset of the Israelites at that time, right? I think it emphasizes God's love for his people. I think it emphasizes his commitment to them.
Yeah.
He's essentially saying, you're so precious to me that I'm willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to protect you.
Yeah.
Whether you find that comforting or unsettling,
Yeah.
you can't deny the sheer intensity of that devotion.
No kidding. It definitely adds this whole new layer to the idea of being chosen, a chosen people. And then there's this other concept that pops up in Isaiah 43.0 about being God's witness. And it's not just about seeing things, it's about sharing what you've experienced with others. I wonder, how does that resonate with you? Even outside of a religious context, what does it mean to be a witness?
I think it speaks to the power of personal testimony. When we share our experiences, beliefs, struggles, triumphs, it connects us.
Right.
We create connections with each other and offer this glimpse into our own understanding of the world. Whether you're sharing your faith or advocating for a cause you believe in, being a witness can be incredibly impactful.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, moving on. There's this kind of interesting shift in Isaiah 43 where, I don't know, we're told to sort of forget the past and embrace something new that God is doing. It's like hitting the reset button, leaving behind old patterns, starting fresh. And the way it's described is so poetic, a road appearing in the wilderness, rivers flowing through the desert, all about transformation, renewal. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's hopeful, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's like saying, even when you feel lost and hopeless, even when it seems like there's nothing around you, there's always potential for something new. It challenges us to let go of those past mistakes and embrace the possibility of a brighter future.
Yeah, I love that. Letting go of the past to embrace something new. But Isaiah doesn't shy away from from addressing Israel's shortcomings either. He points out that they haven't always been the most devoted followers, which I find rather refreshing. It makes the whole narrative a little more relatable, don't you think?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. It adds this layer of complexity and realism to the story, right? They weren't perfect, but even in their failures, there's this thread of forgiveness and redemption running through.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that no matter how far we stray, God's love and mercy are available. We just have to be willing to turn back to him.
Yeah, that's powerful. It really makes you think about your own life, how you deal with those setbacks and failures. So in Isaiah 44, there's this beautiful image of God pouring water on thirsty land and his spirit on Israel's offspring. It's this image of nourishment, life, vitality. What resonates with you about that image?
It's a beautiful image of God's blessings, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not only is he, providing their physical needs, bringing water to this parched land, but he's also nourishing their souls, right? He's nourishing the souls to their future generations.
Yeah.
It speaks to this idea that his love and his care extend, beyond just the individual to encompass an entire lineage, this whole legacy of faith.
Yeah, almost like a promise that future generations will also be taken care of, which must have been very reassuring for the Israelites at that time. And then we dive into this idea of belonging to the Lord, marked, like even on your hand. It's like an outward expression of devotion and identity, right?
It's like a badge of honor, right? This public declaration of faith.
Yeah.
And it contrasts sharply with what comes next, right? The critique of idolatry.
Oh, yeah. Isaiah really goes off on the whole idol-making business. He describes it in such detail. chopping wood, building a fire, even using some of that wood to cook your meal. And then you're, boom, bowing down to the leftover scraps. It's almost comical.
I know, it's funny, right? And I think that's intentional. I think Isaiah's highlighting just how absurd it is to be worshiping something that you just created from materials you used in your everyday life. It's like, dude, you just grilled your lunch over that, and now you're treating it like a god.
Right. It's a powerful way to challenge people's misplaced faith. And the way he describes it, it's not just absurd, it's blinding. He says those who worship idols are literally blinded to truth. Their hearts can't comprehend the big picture. I mean, it makes you wonder, what are the idols in our lives today that might be blinding us?
That's a great question. We may not be, bowing down to literal statues, but, we definitely have our own versions of idols, things we put on a pedestal,
Mm.
prioritize above all else, whether it's, wealth or status or even, technology. These things can easily become distractions, even obsessions that prevent us from seeing the bigger picture.
It's true. What's interesting, though, is that even amidst this very harsh critique of idolatry, Isaiah comes back to that theme of forgiveness and redemption. It's like a constant refrain throughout these chapters. It's like this reminder that no matter how far we stray, there's always a path back.
It's this message of hope, second chances.
Right.
No matter what you've done, no matter how many quote unquote idols you've worshiped, God's forgiveness is always there waiting for you. And this idea of returning to God isn't just this personal thing.
Yeah.
It's celebrated on this cosmic level.
Right.
The heavens and the earth, the mountains, the forests, they all erupt in celebration at the redemption of Jacob. It's this powerful image of universal harmony, restoration.
But then things take this really interesting turn in Isaiah 45 when we're introduced to Cyrus, this Persian king.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Cyrus, this guy, he's not even an Israelite. He gets picked by God to conquer nations and free the Israelites. It really kind of throws a wrench into those traditional ideas of chosenness, doesn't it?
It's like, whoa, hold on. This guy, who doesn't even worship the God of Israel, he's the key to their freedom. It really challenges you to think about how God works and who he chooses to use.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Isaiah even says that Cyrus is completely unaware of God, and yet he's still given this title of honor, his anointed, and he becomes this pivotal player in God's plan. It really makes you think about God's ability to work through anybody, regardless of their background.
It's a real head scratcher. And it opens up some interesting possibilities. If God can work through someone like Cyrus, maybe his plan is much bigger and more inclusive than we initially thought. It makes you wonder who else God might be working through in unexpected ways.
Yeah, that's a great question.
But let's not forget the sheer power that God is, that's attributed to God in these chapters. In Isaiah 45.8, we get this stunning image of like the heavens dripping righteousness and the earth opening up for salvation to bear fruit. It's powerful.
Right.
It really emphasizes God's ability to bring about justice and restoration.
Absolutely.
It's like this force of goodness just pouring out from the heavens and permeating everything. And then we have this equally powerful analogy of the clay and the potter, again, emphasizing God's absolute authority.
Yeah, it's a classic image, right?
Yeah.
But it's so effective. I mean, we're clay, God's the potter, shaping and molding us, raises questions about free will, destiny, but also that we're ultimately in his hands.
Right. It makes you think about your own life, those forces that are shaping you. But Isaiah doesn't stop there. He goes on to say that God creates both light and darkness, well-being and disaster. I mean, that's a tough one. If God's responsible for both, I mean, how do we understand that in terms of, a loving, benevolent God?
Well, that's a question that has, puzzled theologians and philosophers for centuries. It touches on some really deep questions. And
Yeah.
there's no, easy answer. But I think what's important to remember is that God's ways are not our ways. His understanding of good and bad, justice and mercy might be different from our own.
Yeah.
So we can't really try to impose our own, limited human perspective onto God's actions.
It's a humbling thought, and it makes these chapters of Isaiah all the more compelling because they really push us to wrestle with these big questions. They're not giving us, easy answers, but they're inviting us to think critically, come to our own conclusions.
I think that's what makes, studying scripture so rewarding, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about, passively absorbing information. It's about this active engagement, asking questions, seeking understanding, and allowing ourselves to be transformed by the text.
Mm-hmm. Well said. We've covered a lot of ground. This is just the first part of our deep dive into Isaiah. There's so much more. But before we move on, what's stood out to you so far? What's resonating?
I think the interplay between God's absolute power and his unwavering love. It's this paradoxical concept. It's both awe-inspiring and comforting at the same time.
It really is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, for sure. This all-powerful God who at the same time is so deeply invested in his creation.
And it makes you think, how do those two aspects, that power and that love, how do they play out in our lives? How do we actually experience that?
It's a good question. It's something to keep in mind as we keep exploring these chapters. Speaking of which, we were talking about that image of God as the potter and us as the clay.
Yeah.
Powerful metaphor, but it does make you wonder about, how much control do we really have?
Right. If God is the one who is shaping us, molding us, where does that leave our own choices? It's that classic free will dilemma.
It is, and I don't think there's an easy answer, is there? People have been debating that for centuries.
Mm.
But I do think, even within that framework of God's ultimate authority, there's still room for, for human agency, human decision-making. Think about it. I mean, a potter can't, force the clay into a specific form if the clay is too dry or brittle. The clay has to be pliable, receptive.
Right.
So maybe our role is to make ourselves receptive to God's guidance, cultivate that willingness to be shaped, molded.
I like that. Maybe that's the key, making ourselves receptive. And that shaping process, it's not always easy or comfortable, right? I mean, sometimes it takes going through tough stuff like, like the exile that the Israelites faced.
Right.
And speaking of exile, remember that image of like walking through fire and water unharmed? That ultimate reassurance
Yeah, yeah.
of God's protection even in those tough times.
Absolutely. It's a metaphor for facing life's challenges with courage and confidence, right?
Yeah.
Knowing no matter what you're going through, you're not alone.
Yeah, and it's not just about surviving those challenges, it's about being changed by them. Remember that line about forgetting the past and embracing the new thing God is doing?
Yeah.
It's like a call to grow, to evolve, and it's often through those difficult experiences that we, I think, learn those valuable lessons, discover those strengths we didn't even know we had.
Right. It's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
But it's not just individual growth.
Yeah.
It's this collective transformation too. Remember how the whole nation of Israel was being redeemed? Restored.
Yeah, and that restoration is about so much more than just going back to their homeland.
Right.
It's about being reconciled with God, renewing that relationship.
Absolutely. It's about fulfilling their purpose as God's chosen people.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to, Cyrus,
Yeah.
that unexpected hero, the non-Israelite who ends up playing this key role in their restoration.
Talk about a plot twist. Right.
Yeah.
It really challenges our assumptions about how God works, who he chooses.
Exactly. It reminds us that God's ways are not our ways, and that his plans, they often unfold in ways we could have never imagined.
And it also highlights like the universal scope of God's plan.
Yeah.
It's not just about one group or nation. Remember how Isaiah says that salvation is available to like literally all the ends of the earth?
Turn to me and be saved, he says. It doesn't matter your background, your beliefs, your past mistakes. It's for everybody.
And it's not just about avoiding punishment. It's about finding that real fulfillment, aligning yourself with God's will.
Right. And I think it goes even deeper than that, right? Aligning ourselves with God's will. It's not just about blindly following rules. It's about cultivating a relationship with God, seeking his wisdom, allowing his love to actually transform us from the inside out.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. It's about letting go of our own limited perspective and embracing something bigger, more expansive, something rooted in God's wisdom, God's love.
Absolutely.
And that's where things get really interesting when we open ourselves up to that. It can impact not only our own lives, but also the world around us. But, before we go too far down that road, I want to circle back to something that really struck me earlier. That idea that God creates both light and darkness, well-being and disaster. I'm still kind of struggling with that one.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the harder concepts to grasp. There are many different ways to interpret it, but I think one way to look at it is to consider the idea that God is, ultimately responsible for everything that happens. He's the source of all creation, the good and the bad.
Okay, but if that's true, why would a loving God allow bad things to happen at all? Why create darkness, disaster? It seems to go against everything we understand about, a God who is good and compassionate.
Yeah, it's a tough question. One that's led a lot of people to, question their faith. But I think it's important to remember that we're looking at this from a very limited human perspective. We don't have the same understanding of the universe that God does.
So you're saying we shouldn't try to put God in a box, in our own little categories of good and bad.
Right. His ways are higher than our ways, and his purposes, they're often beyond our understanding. But even in the midst of darkness and disaster, there's always a possibility for redemption, for growth.
Hmm.
Look at the Israelites. They went through a terrible time, but it led to their spiritual renewal, a deeper understanding of God's love and faithfulness.
So it's not about denying the reality of suffering. It's about finding meaning in it, allowing it to change us, make us stronger, make us more resilient.
Absolutely, and that's where faith comes in, right?
Mm.
It's about trusting that even when we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, God is still there. He's guiding us, working things out.
Yeah, that is a really powerful message of hope. And it resonates, especially when I think about all the challenges we face in our own lives. The uncertainty.
It's a message that has sustained people for centuries, you know, and it's one that continues to offer us comfort and guidance in a world that often feels very chaotic and unpredictable.
Speaking of guidance, remember that idea we talked about earlier, being God's witness? What does that look like in a world where there's so much suffering, so much injustice?
I think it starts with acknowledging that suffering, refusing to turn away from it, standing with those who are hurting, using our voices, our actions to advocate for change.
It's about putting our faith into action, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk.
Exactly. And it might mean stepping outside our comfort zones, challenging the status quo,
Mm.
speaking truth to power.
But isn't that what it means to be a follower? Standing up for what's right, even when it's hard.
Absolutely. It's something we see all over the Bible, from the prophets all the way to Jesus, standing up for those who are marginalized.
And it's something we're called to do today in our own ways,
Hmm.
whether it's, fighting for social justice, caring for the sick, even just lending an ear to someone who is hurting.
Yeah.
There are so many ways to be a witness.
Yeah, and those seemingly small acts of kindness and compassion can have such a ripple effect,
Yeah.
you know, help create a better world.
It's about seeing that we are all connected.
Right.
We're part of one human family and our actions matter.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to that universality of God's love, that message of salvation that Isaiah is talking about.
Mhm.
It's not just for the select few, it's for everyone.
It's a message of hope, inclusion. We are all loved by God. We all have the potential to experience that.
And that love isn't just some abstract idea. It has the power to heal, to empower us to live fully, to inspire us to create a more just and compassionate world.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. And I think it's a really fitting way to wrap up our exploration of these chapters of Isaiah. They've really pushed us to think about God's power, our place in his plan, the nature of redemption. It's a lot to process.
Yeah, a lot to process. But I think ultimately, the takeaway is one of hope.
Mm. Yeah.
Even when things are tough, even when things are uncertain, God is with us. He's guiding us. He's working things out.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, how these chapters can be like comforting and challenging at the same time. We've covered so much and God's power, his love, that whole idea of being chosen, and even the tough stuff like suffering and what redemption really means.
With a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so interesting. It forces us to think, to ask big questions about who God is, how he interacts with the world.
I agree. It's definitely not a passive read.
No, definitely not. And speaking of big questions, I keep coming back to that image of the heavens, like dripping righteousness and the earth opening up for salvation to bear fruit. What do you think Isaiah was getting at with that? It's so powerful.
It's such a vivid image, right? I think he's really trying to capture the immensity of God's power, the way his grace can transform everything. It's like this outpouring of goodness, this renewal coming straight from heaven, changing everything it touches. I think for people who are in exile, longing for something better, that image must have been so powerful.
It's like, yeah, things are broken. There's despair. But there's this incredible potential for healing, for growth. And not just for individuals, but for like the whole world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And remember he talks about the mountains, the forests, even the heavens and earth, rejoicing at the redemption of Jacob.
Yeah.
It's like this cosmic celebration, God's victory over evil, harmony restored.
Yeah. That's a beautiful picture of unity, of things being made right. It makes you think about all the division in the world today. Like, what would it take for us to experience that kind of universal harmony?
That's the question, isn't it? It's a big one. I think it starts with understanding that we're all connected. We're one human family. Doesn't matter our differences. It's about letting go of the things that divide us. Prejudice, fear, anger, embracing love, compassion.
It's a tall order, but it's a vision worth striving for, I think. And it ties into that message of salvation that Isaiah is proclaiming. Remember how he's calling out to everyone, to all the ends of the earth? urging them to turn to God.
Mm-hmm. Turn to me and be saved. It's a powerful invitation. And again, it's not just about escaping punishment. It's about a complete transformation, a change in your heart, your priorities. It's about letting God's love guide you, shape your actions.
Is it becoming that potter's clay again, right?
Yes, open and ready to be shaped. And as we allow that to happen, as we're shaped by God's love, we become instruments of His grace, His peace out in the world.
That's a beautiful thought. And it goes back to that ripple effect we talked about, right? When we change, the world changes too. But, I'm still thinking about Cyrus, the Persian king. God chose someone who didn't even worship him to be such a key part of his plan. That's amazing to me.
I know, it's remarkable. It really shows us just how big God's grace is. The unexpected ways He works. It breaks down all our categories of who's in, who's out, who's worthy. It's humbling, isn't it?
Yeah. God's plan is way bigger than we can imagine. And He can use anyone to do His work.
And it reminds us to be open to the unexpected. You never know. God could be working through people and situations that we wouldn't even consider.
Right. It's a call to be humble, to be willing to expand our understanding of how God moves. So we've reached the end of our deep dive into Isaiah 43-45. What's your biggest takeaway? What are you going to be thinking about?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that even when things feel chaotic, uncertain, God is still in control. He's working behind the scenes, moving us towards that hope, that restoration. And even when we don't get it, we can trust that He loves us, that His plan is for our good.
I love that. And I think it's something we all need to hear right now, especially in the world today.
Absolutely. So, to everyone listening, take these words from Isaiah with you today. Let them challenge you, inspire you. Think about the things you're facing, the hopes you're holding on to, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see God working in your life in some unexpected ways.
Such good questions. And thank you all for joining us for this deep dive into Isaiah. We hope it's given you something to think about, something to hold on to. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep seeking the truth.